Hey, what's up, y'all? Before we jump into our Wednesday wisdom, I really want to start by saying thank you for being a part of this community. Last week I put out a post. I don't know if you saw it or not. Maybe you did. Seemed like a lot of you did because there's a lot of shares about just the desperation happening right now in the paddock and in the IndyCar community. Put out a post about needing prayer. And you guys showed up, you shared it, and I believe you prayed. I got to be honest, it's easy to get lost in just the pretty cars and the events and all of that. It's cool, but you got to understand there's real life happening in people's lives. And we're talking about a community of a couple thousand people. And with that community comes death, sickness, struggles, pain, all of that. And frankly, Chuck and I, we love being at the track. It's a gift and we're honored to be there. That ain't why we're there, Holy. I mean, we're there to be invested in the lives, and those lives happen 7 days a week, 24/7. And I just got to say, last week was a heavy week. These weeks ticking down to the end of the season are heavy weeks. Like I mentioned in our post, we have families that we're working with that are being torn apart by divorce. We have families that we're working with that are walking through the devastation of losing a child. There's families in our community that are wrestling with cancer right now, with sickness, with depression, with anxiety, like real stuff. And so I just say that to say thank you. Thank you for praying because it matters. It matters. Last week to see this family absolutely devastated, your prayers were felt. The presence of God was thick in that place. And so I'm sorry for my little rant. I want you to know how much we appreciate you. Those of you that are praying, those of you that are giving, those of you that are invested into this ministry, thank you, thank you, thank you. It matters. You matter, and you're making a difference. And, we're seeing the highest of highs this year. We're seeing God just do immeasurably more. The biggest year I've ever seen since being a part of this ministry. But it's equally the lowest year and the hardest, with some of the hardest things I've ever seen in my life. And so we appreciate you. Thank you for being a part of this. And so having said that, I do want to jump into our time in Luke. Chuck and I, we don't talk about our stuff before we go through it. He kind of goes where God leads him. I go where God leads me. But I got to say last week, when he talked about having kind of a right perspective of yourself before you have a perspective of others. And he used Matthew 18. Man, solid gold and solid hardship. Like that's hard teaching. That's stuff that I don't want to read and hear, but it's important to reconcile that, to grab a hold of that before we go to where we are today in verse 39, which in Luke 6:39, Luke writes, he also told him a parable. Can a blind man lead a blind man? Will they not both fall into a pit? A disciple is not above his teacher, but everyone, when he is fully trained, will be like his teacher. Now, there's this kind of erroneous perspective when it comes to pastors. As a pastor of, 12 years or so, people inadvertently, they put you on this pedestal. Like you don't have struggles, you don't have issues, you don't wrestle with things, and it couldn't be further from the truth. In fact, I would say I know a lot of pastors, and we're probably some of the most messed up people there are, desperate for God's grace. And so I love this piece, because if you haven't figured out the loving your enemies part yet, if you haven't figured out the not judging others yet, like those are things that we've really got to reconcile and work through. Because we're all called to be a disciple. We're all disciples. As we chase Jesus, that makes you a disciple. And being a disciple, I can kind of over dumb it down or simplify it, but it's as simple as this. Know one thing, do one thing. Know one thing, do one thing. So when you know something, you're accountable for it. So like now, we all know, because of what we just learned in Luke, to love our enemies and to not judge others. But in order to do that, we really need to first look in the mirror and see what we see in our own heart and our own lives and make some adjustments and correct that. We don't have the right to judge others. We don't have the right to hate anybody. God doesn't give us that. We don't have a license for that. But I can tell you that as we love those around us, as we have a right perspective of ourselves before we look at others, it's incredible how much God uses that to grow us in our own walk and our own faith. And there was, an old friend of mine taught me back when I was in India, it was every Paul should be a Timothy and every Timothy should be a Paul. So we should all be leading somebody, and somebody should all be leading us. And so what that happens is when it's happening in your own life and you're reconciling those things, you're working through those things, the person you're leading is doing the same thing. And that's how discipleship works. That's why we need each other. That's why we need community. It's not just enough to have a talking head on stage each and every Sunday. You need to have people in your life. And so I know that's a lot, but I just want to leave you with this just big idea, especially with where we've come through and what Jesus is showing us about loving our enemies, about judging others, is to know one thing and do one thing. What is that one thing? What is it that God's speaking to your heart right now that you need to work on? And work on it. And invite others to help you work on it. Look, man, I have just been a complete kind of not in a good place, man. Help me with that. Here, I'm judging people. I'm totally judging people. Help me with that. Invite people to help you with that. Because keeping it inside and keeping it a secret, it ain't going to work. So anyway, what's that? Know one thing, do one thing. As you grow in your faith with Jesus, hey, we got 2 weeks left. Last week was brutal. We got 2 weeks ahead to finish out the season strong. Please diligently be in prayer for us. Hey, thanks y'all for sticking it out. I'm a little over time. It's all good. Have a great day.